They buried Robert Mercer on a cold Tuesday morning in November. The sky was the color of wet concrete. The wind came across the open field behind the cemetery and cut through coats like it was looking for bone. Elaine Mercer stood at the graveside in a black dress she had sewn herself. She was 61 years old. Her silver hair was pulled back in a tight bun. Her hands were clasped in front of her, knuckles white, but her face was still. She did not cry. Not because she was not devastated, but because she had done her crying in private over the past 9 days, in the bathroom with the shower running, in the truck parked behind the barn, in the bedroom she had shared with Robert for 37 years, where his reading glasses still sat on the nightstand and his boots still stood by the door as if he might walk back in and put them on. She had cried until there was nothing left. Now she was just hollow. Robert had died of a heart attack. Quick, no warning. He had been feeding the horses on a Saturday morning and he simply fell. Elaine found him in the hay 20 minutes later. His hand was still holding the feed bucket. The horses were standing around him like mourners. 40 people came to the funeral, neighbors mostly, a few friends from church. The pastor from the small Baptist congregation Robert had attended since childhood, and Elaine's 3 adult children, Michael, 36, David, 33, and Karen, 29. Michael lived 4 hours away in the city. He worked in commercial real estate, wore expensive watches, and spoke in a voice that always sounded like he was closing a deal. David was in between jobs, which was how he had described his employment status for most of the past decade. Karen was married to a man named Troy, who worked in finance and whose smile never quite reached his eyes. The 3 of them stood together at the funeral, slightly apart from Elaine, huddled in their dark coats. They looked appropriately sad. They dabbed their eyes, they shook hands with neighbors and accepted condolences with practiced grace. But Elaine noticed something. During the reception at the church afterward, while she was thanking people for coming and accepting foil-covered dishes, her 3 children were in the corner of the fellowship hall talking among themselves in low voices. Michael had his phone out. David was nodding. Karen glanced over at Elaine once, then quickly looked away. Elaine told herself it was grief. People process differently. Children huddle together when they lose a parent. It was normal, she told herself that. But something in her gut, the same instinct that had told her when the creek was about to flood, when a horse was about to go lame, when a storm was going to turn worse than the forecast said, that instinct whispered that something was wrong. She ignored it. She had a husband to mourn and a farm to keep running. She did not have the energy for suspicion. That was her first mistake. The farm sat on 40 acres of land at the end of Winslow Road, 3 miles outside a town called Briar Creek. Robert's grandfather had bought the land in 1946 with money he saved working in a steel mill. He cleared it by hand, built the first farmhouse himself, and planted the first row of apple trees that still stood along the eastern fence. Robert inherited the land when his father passed in 1989. By then, the original farmhouse was falling apart, so Robert and Elaine tore it down and built a new one together. They did most of the work themselves. Elaine learned to frame walls, lay tile, wire light fixtures, and hang drywall. She could operate a tractor by the time she was 30 and could reshingle a roof by the time she was 35. The farm was not a large operation. They kept horses, a small herd of cattle, and a vegetable garden that Elaine sold from at the county farmers market every Saturday. The land itself was the real value: 40 acres of rolling green countryside, a spring-fed pond, mature hardwood timber, and a hilltop view that stretched all the way to the Blue Ridge foothills. Developers had been sniffing around Briar Creek for years. The town was growing. A new highway interchange was being built 12 miles south. Land values were climbing. A company called Ridgepoint Development had sent Robert 2 letters in the past 3 years offering to buy the farm. The first offer was $1.2 million. The second was $1.8 million. Robert threw both letters away without responding. After Robert's death, the deed transferred to Elaine through the survivorship clause in their joint ownership. Elaine Mercer, sole owner. She filed the transfer paperwork herself at the county recorder's office because she was a woman who believed in handling her own business. She planned to live on the farm until she died. Then, the land could go to her children, or to the county land trust, or to the horses for all she cared. But while she was alive, nobody was selling it. Robert's grandfather had cleared this land with his hands. Robert had built this house with his back. Elaine had maintained it with her heart. It was not a piece of real estate. It was a living monument to 3 generations of Mercers who believed that land was not something you flipped. It was something you honored. She assumed her children understood this. She was wrong. It started 11 days after the funeral. Elaine was in the kitchen making coffee at 6:00 a.m. when her phone rang. It was Michael. He started with pleasantries. How was she feeling? Was she eating? Did she need anything? Then his voice shifted into what Elaine recognized as his business tone, smoother, more measured, each word chosen like a chess move. He said he had been thinking about her situation. A woman alone on 40 acres, the upkeep, the costs, the isolation. He said it was not practical for a 61-year-old woman to run a farm by herself. He said they, meaning he, David, and Karen, had been talking, and they thought the smartest move was to sell the property. Elaine set her coffee mug down slowly. Sell the property. Michael said yes. He said the market was hot. He said he had connections in development. He said Ridgepoint was still interested and the offer would likely be north of $2 million now with the highway project moving forward. He said they could split the proceeds and Elaine could move into a nice apartment or a retirement community somewhere closer to town. Elaine was quiet for a long time. Then she said no, not an angry no, not a dramatic no, a simple, clear, complete no. She said the farm was not for sale. She said she was perfectly capable of running it. She said she appreciated the concern, but the conversation was over. Michael's tone hardened slightly. He said she was being emotional. He said she was not thinking clearly because of the grief. He said they should revisit the conversation in a few weeks when she had time to process. Elaine said there was nothing to revisit. She hung up. The second call came 3 days later from David. Same script, different delivery. David played the sympathy card. He was worried about her. He couldn't sleep thinking about her out there alone. It was not safe. He mentioned coyotes, falling tree limbs, the fact that the nearest hospital was 20 minutes away. Wouldn't she feel better somewhere with people around? Elaine said no again. The third call came from Karen. Karen cried. She said she was scared for her mother. She said Troy had done some research and retirement communities were really lovely now. She mentioned one with a swimming pool and a book club. Elaine listened patiently. Then she said, Karen, I have lived on this land for 37 years. I am not leaving it for a swimming pool. After the third call, the conversation stopped. For 2 weeks, there was silence. Elaine thought they had accepted her decision. She went back to her routine, feeding the animals, tending the garden, repairing a fence section the wind had damaged. She grieved her husband quietly and privately. She ate dinner alone at the kitchen table and listened to the silence that Robert used to fill. She thought the worst was behind her. On a Thursday afternoon in December, a process server arrived at the farm. A young man in a cheap blazer who looked uncomfortable standing on a dirt driveway. He handed Elaine an envelope and said she had been served. Elaine opened the envelope at the kitchen table. Inside was a legal document. She read it 3 times to make sure she understood it. Then she read it a fourth time because she could not believe what she was reading. It was a petition for guardianship and conservatorship filed in the county probate court. The petitioners were Michael Mercer, David Mercer, and Karen Mercer Boyd. The subject of the petition was Elaine Ann Mercer. The petition stated that Elaine was suffering from cognitive decline exacerbated by grief and isolation. It stated that she was unable to manage her personal affairs and financial decisions in a competent manner. It stated that she was at risk of self-neglect and exploitation. It requested that the court appoint Michael Mercer as her legal guardian with full authority over her financial and medical decisions. If granted, the guardianship would give Michael the legal power to sell the farm without Elaine's consent. Attached to the petition were 3 signed affidavits, one from each child. Each one described concerning behavior they had allegedly observed. Michael's affidavit said Elaine had been confused and disoriented at the funeral and unable to recognize several family members. David said she had been talking to herself and leaving appliances on. Karen said Elaine had expressed irrational attachment to the property and refused to consider reasonable alternatives, which Karen described as evidence of impaired judgment. Every word was a lie. Elaine had not been confused at the funeral. She had greeted every single person by name. She did not leave appliances on. She had been running a household for 4 decades without incident, and her attachment to the farm was not irrational. It was the most rational thing about her. She sat at the table with the papers spread before her, and she understood, with a clarity that felt like being plunged into ice water, what was happening. Her children were not worried about her. They were not trying to protect her. They were trying to take control of her property by having her declared incompetent. Her own children, the ones she had carried in her body, the ones she had nursed through fevers and driven to school and helped with homework and loved with everything she had. They had looked at their father's grave and seen a business opportunity. They had looked at their mother and seen an obstacle. Elaine sat in the kitchen for a long time. The house was silent except for the ticking of the clock and the distant sound of the horses moving in the barn. She looked at her hands, rough, calloused, scarred from decades of real work. These were not the hands of an incompetent woman. These were the hands that had built the life her children now wanted to liquidate. She did not cry. She was beyond tears. What she felt was not sadness. It was a deep, ancient fury, the fury of a woman who had given everything and been repaid with betrayal, the fury of a mother who realized that the children she raised had grown into strangers. She picked up her phone and called her neighbor, June Hobbs. June was 68, a retired county clerk, and the most no-nonsense woman in Briar Creek. They had been friends for 30 years. June, I need a lawyer, a real one, the kind that makes people regret their decisions. June was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I know exactly who to call. Her name was Patricia Yoon. She was 54 years old, tall, precise, and had a reputation in the region as someone you hired when the situation was serious and the other side thought they had already won. She specialized in elder law, guardianship disputes, and estate litigation. She wore a red wool coat that she never took off during initial consultations, as if to signal that she might not stay long if the case did not interest her. Elaine met her 2 days later in Patricia's office in town. She brought every document she had, the petition, the affidavits, the deed to the farm, the property tax records, the bank statements, Robert's will, and a folder of personal records she had kept meticulously for decades. Patricia read everything without speaking. 20 minutes of silence. Elaine sat across the desk and waited. Finally, Patricia looked up. Your children filed these affidavits under oath. Yes, and the claims in them are false. Every word. Patricia leaned back. Mrs. Mercer, guardianship petitions are serious. If granted, you would lose control of your finances, your property, and potentially your medical decisions. Your son Michael would have the legal authority to sell your farm, manage your bank accounts, and make choices about your care, all without your consent. I understand. The good news is that the burden of proof is on them. They have to demonstrate to a judge that you are truly incapacitated. And based on what I see here, she tapped the stack of documents. They have nothing. Their affidavits are vague, unsubstantiated, and contradicted by your actual records. She pulled out a yellow legal pad. Here is what we are going to do. First, we request an independent cognitive and medical evaluation. You will be examined by a court-appointed physician, not one of their choosing. Second, we compile a record of your competence, financial records showing you have been managing the farm, paying bills, filing taxes, and maintaining the property without incident. Third, we depose your children under oath and let them try to defend these affidavits when faced with direct questions. She paused. And fourth, and this is important, we investigate whether there is a financial motive behind this petition. If your children are attempting to gain control of your assets for their own benefit under the guise of concern for your welfare, that is not just unethical, it is potentially criminal. Elaine nodded. There is a development company called Ridgepoint. They offered my husband nearly $2 million for the land. He turned them down. I believe Michael has been in contact with them. Patricia wrote the name down. I will find out. They shook hands. Patricia did not take off her red coat for the entire meeting. But at the door, she paused and said, "Mrs. Mercer, I want you to know something. I have handled dozens of these cases. Most of the time, the person being targeted is alone and afraid and does not fight back. That is what the petitioners are counting on. They are counting on you being too tired, too old, and too heartbroken to resist. Are you?" Elaine looked at her. "Miss Yoon, I have buried a husband, birthed 3 children, rebuilt a barn in a thunderstorm, and pulled a calf out of a ditch at midnight in January. I am tired every day of my life. But I am not the kind of tired that quits." Patricia smiled. It was the first time she had smiled the entire meeting. "Good. Then let's go to war." Over the following 3 weeks, Patricia's team dismantled the children's case piece by piece. The independent medical evaluation came first. Elaine was examined by Dr. Lena Ose, a geriatric psychiatrist appointed by the court. The evaluation lasted 4 hours and included cognitive testing, memory assessments, reasoning exercises, and a lengthy personal interview. Dr. Osai's report was unequivocal. Elaine Mercer showed no signs of cognitive impairment. Her memory was sharp. Her reasoning was sound. Her judgment was intact. The doctor noted that Elaine was remarkably lucid, articulate, and self-aware for a woman of any age, and that her emotional state was consistent with normal grief following the recent loss of a spouse. Next came the financial records. Patricia compiled a detailed accounting of Elaine's management of the farm over the past 10 years. Every bill paid on time, every tax filed, every insurance premium current, every piece of equipment maintained, every animal properly cared for, every farmer's market transaction recorded in a small green notebook Elaine had kept since 1998. The record was flawless. This was not a woman who could not manage her affairs. This was a woman who managed them better than most people half her age. Then came the investigation into Ridgepoint Development. Patricia's associate discovered that Michael Mercer had exchanged emails with a Ridgepoint acquisitions manager named Frank DeLuca over the past 18 months. The correspondence began while Robert was still alive. In those emails, Michael discussed the potential availability of the Winslow Road property and asked about the current offer range. After Robert's death, the emails became more direct. Michael wrote that the ownership situation was being resolved and that he expected to have authority over the property within 60 to 90 days. He had been planning this before his father was even buried. Patricia also discovered that David owed over $40,000 in personal debts, credit cards, a defaulted car loan, an unpaid judgment from a former landlord. Karen's husband, Troy, had recently lost a significant amount in a failed investment and was facing a margin call. All 3 children had urgent financial motives to push for the sale. The depositions were devastating. Under oath, with Patricia asking precise clinical questions, the children's stories fell apart. Michael was asked to provide specific examples of Elaine's alleged confusion at the funeral. He stammered. He said she had seemed off. Patricia asked him to name one person Elaine failed to recognize. He could not. Patricia then produced a video taken by a neighbor at the reception showing Elaine greeting 14 people by name, having coherent conversations, and organizing the cleanup afterward. David was asked about Elaine leaving appliances on. He said he had visited the farm once in September and noticed the stove burner was on. Patricia asked if Elaine was cooking at the time. David paused, then admitted yes, she was making soup. Patricia asked if making soup constituted evidence of cognitive decline. David did not answer. Karen was asked about Elaine's irrational attachment to the property. Patricia asked Karen to define what a rational attachment to the home you had lived in for 37 years would look like. Karen started crying and said she was just worried about her mother. Patricia asked if she had discussed the Ridgepoint offer with Michael. Karen looked at her lawyer, then said yes. The guardianship hearing took place on a Wednesday morning in January in the county probate courtroom. It was a small room, wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lights, an American flag in the corner that leaned slightly to the left. Judge Harold Wen presided. He was 67, known for his patience, his thoroughness, and his absolute intolerance for people who wasted his court's time. Michael, David, and Karen sat on one side with their attorney, a young man from Michael's firm who looked increasingly uncomfortable as the morning progressed. Elaine sat on the other side with Patricia. Elaine was wearing a clean blue blouse and her good black pants. Her silver hair was pulled back. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and her back straight. She looked exactly like what she was, a competent, dignified woman who had been insulted by the people she loved most. Patricia presented the evidence methodically. The medical evaluation, the financial records, the farm management documentation, the Ridgepoint emails, the deposition transcripts. She laid each piece out like bricks in a wall until the wall was so high that nobody on the other side could see over it. The children's attorney attempted to argue that the petition was filed out of genuine concern and that the children simply wanted to ensure their mother's well-being. Patricia responded by reading Michael's email to Frank DeLuca aloud in the courtroom, the one where Michael wrote that he expected to have authority over the property within 60 to 90 days. She asked the court to reconcile that language with genuine concern. The courtroom was silent. Judge Wen reviewed the evidence for 40 minutes. Then he spoke. He said he had reviewed the petition, the affidavits, the medical evaluation, the financial records, and the correspondence with Ridgepoint Development. He said the evidence overwhelmingly demonstrated that Elaine Mercer was a competent, self-sufficient individual with no signs of cognitive impairment. He said the petition was not supported by any credible medical or factual basis. Then his tone changed. He looked directly at Michael, David, and Karen. He said that what he found particularly troubling was the apparent financial motive behind the petition. He said the Ridgepoint correspondence suggested that the true purpose of the guardianship filing was not to protect Elaine Mercer, but to gain control of her assets for personal financial benefit. He said that filing a fraudulent guardianship petition was a serious matter. He said that using the court system to strip a competent person of their rights was not just a legal failure, but a moral one. He denied the petition in its entirety. He ordered Michael, David, and Karen to pay all of Elaine's legal fees, and he referred the case to the district attorney's office for a review of potential elder abuse charges. Then he looked at Elaine and said, "Mrs. Mercer, you are free to go home." Elaine stood up. She thanked the judge. She did not look at her children as she walked out of the courtroom. Patricia walked beside her in her red coat. Outside on the courthouse steps, the January air was cold and sharp. Elaine stopped and took a long breath. Patricia asked if she was all right. Elaine said, "I buried my husband 2 months ago. Today I buried something else." Patricia nodded. "What will you do now?" Elaine looked out at the gray sky. "I am going to go home, feed my horses, and fix the fence in the south pasture. That is what I am going to do." She drove back to the farm alone. The road was empty. The fields on either side were brown and sleeping under the winter sky. When she pulled into the driveway, the horses heard the truck and came to the fence. She got out, walked over, and pressed her face against the neck of the old mare, Ruby, and stood there for a long time, breathing in the warm animal smell of home. In the weeks that followed, Elaine made changes. Not dramatic ones, quiet, deliberate ones. She had new locks installed on every door. She updated her will. She removed Michael, David, and Karen as beneficiaries and instead established a land trust that would preserve the farm in perpetuity after her death. The 40 acres would never be developed, not by her children, not by Ridgepoint, not by anyone. She installed a new gate at the entrance to the property, a heavy iron gate with a simple latch. Above it, she welded a small metal sign that read, "Mercer Farm, Est. 1946. Private property." She did not add "no trespassing." She did not need to. The gate spoke for itself. Michael called once, 3 weeks after the hearing. He said he wanted to apologize. He said things had gotten out of hand. He said he never meant for it to go that far. Elaine listened. Then she told him that an apology without change is just performance. She told him that she was not closing the door forever, but that right now the door was closed and he needed to respect that. David never called. Karen sent a letter. It was 3 pages long, full of justifications and excuses disguised as remorse. Elaine read it once and put it in a drawer. She did not hate her children. Hate required energy she could not spare. What she felt was something heavier and quieter, the grief of a mother who had to accept that the people she raised had become people she did not recognize. One Saturday morning in March, Elaine drove to the farmer's market for the first time since Robert's death. She set up her table with jars of preserves, bundles of dried herbs, and bags of early spring greens. Her neighbors stopped by one after another. They squeezed her hand. They told her they had heard what happened. They told her she was brave. She did not feel brave. She felt necessary. There is a difference. June Hobbs stopped by the table around mid-morning with 2 cups of coffee. They sat together on folding chairs in the thin spring sunlight. June asked her how she was doing. Really doing. Elaine sipped her coffee and thought about it. Then she said something she had been turning over in her mind for weeks. She said that people talk about family like it is sacred and untouchable, like blood is a permanent contract that cannot be broken no matter what. But she had learned that blood is not a contract. It is a starting point. What you build on top of it, the trust, the respect, the daily choice to treat someone with dignity, that is what makes a family real. And when those things are missing, what you have left is not a family. It is just a group of people who share a last name and a set of expectations they never earned. June was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You should tell other people that." So Elaine did. She started hosting Sunday morning coffee at the farmhouse. Open invitation. Neighbors, friends, women from church, anyone who wanted to sit on the porch and talk about real things. She told her story not for pity, but because she knew other people, other mothers, other widows, other women living alone on land someone else wanted, needed to hear it. She told them to keep their names on their deeds. She told them to read every document before signing it. She told them that love is not a reason to hand over control. She told them that the people who pressure you to make decisions quickly are almost always the ones who benefit from your confusion. And she told them the hardest truth she had ever learned. Your children are not entitled to your life's work simply because they exist. You brought them into this world. You fed them, clothed them, educated them, and gave them every chance to build something of their own. That was your gift. Your land, your home, your savings, those are not extensions of that gift. Those are yours. You earned them with your body and your years. And anyone who tries to take them from you, anyone, even your own blood, is not acting out of love. They are acting out of entitlement. And entitlement dressed up as concern is still theft. The women listened. Some nodded slowly. One woman, a widow in her 70s whose son had been pressuring her to sell her house, went home that afternoon and called a lawyer. Elaine Mercer sat on her porch that evening as the sun went down behind the ridge. The horses grazed in the field below. The new gate stood solid at the end of the driveway. The house was quiet, but not empty. It was full of 37 years of living. She missed Robert every single day. She grieved for the relationship she had lost with her children. She knew the pain would not go away entirely. Some wounds are not meant to heal. They are meant to teach. But the farm was still hers. The land was still green. The sky above Winslow Road was turning gold and pink, and the air smelled like wood smoke and cold earth, and the first impossible promise of spring. She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug and watched the light fade, and she felt something she had not felt since the morning Robert died. She felt whole.